Hi folks, Slick Slices here. Today we have the second of the Jack Wolf knives. This one, Modern Interpretations of Timeless Designs. This one again has come to me from Paddy's Potato Peelers. He gets sent these and then he passes them on to me and then I pass them on. Interestingly, I was going to show you the label on the bottom of this box, but I noticed it's actually in the wrong box. It's in the Sharpshooter Jack's box, because this isn't the Sharpshooter Jack. This is the laid back Jack. Now, I'll turn this around. Laid back Jack. The laid back Jack is a surfing wolf. An interesting concept, nonetheless, but there we are. Used to do a bit of surfing in my youth, but that was a long time ago. It does say, do not unscrew the knife, and I want to talk about that one today because I've spoken to Ben Belkin, the man behind Jack Wolf Knives, about this particular point. But anyway, it comes in a nice tin, and inside the tin we have one of these pogs, and I don't know what POG stands for, but apparently they're some people like them. I just don't see the point. They just seem a bit pointless to me, but you know, nonetheless, they are. That's what it is. And there also comes in there, actually, before I show you that, comes with a really nice leather slip. And this slip is, I have to say, better than the one that came with the Sharpshooter. I think the matching up of the stitching and so forth is better. It's still not really, it's not burnished or anything around the edges. But it's a, you know, it's a perfectly usable slip, and reasonably quite thick leather. It's relatively soft and malleable, holds the knife well. Maybe look at that in a second, but we'll see. Also inside there comes a rolled up cloth, which says Jack Wolf Knives. I like these cloths and they're really good for wiping your knife with, but I always I've got a whole series of these, so you know, Chris Reeves and Rockstead and whatever, and I always keep them pristine. Usually I don't even take them out of their packets, just because, you know, it kind of goes with the knife and the box away in the cupboard, in case I ever pass the thing on. So what actually is it? Well, it is a Swayback jackknife. Swayback jackknife is well, I'll look at the history of the Swayback jackknife in a minute, but really in its current form I think we probably owe it to Tony Bowes. Now, Tony Bowes never pretended that he invented knife styles, but he, a bit like Ben actually, took a traditional style and updated it to make it something useful to the modern world. And he produced knives generally often along with Case. He did his own custom knives, but most of the knives you'll see, Tony Bowes knives, are Case collaborations, and they came out with very traditional designs, made in traditional looking designs, sorry, made in traditional ways, but with a modern twist to them. And what he really did is he took the Swayback jackknife. Jackknife, incidentally, is a knife where all the blades open from one end, and if you've got a single bladed knife, any single bladed knife could be called a jackknife. And he took the very traditional English Swayback handle. This doesn't have a huge sway back in it, but it is hollow on the back here. You know, it curves round at the front and it curves in at the back. And he combined it with, again, a very traditional English pattern blade, the Wharncliffe blade. Wharncliffe blade is named after Lord Wharncliffe, who was a lord in Yorkshire in England. And he combined the two, and he made a sort of a new knife, although it looks as though it ought to be a traditional design. In its modern form, I think it probably only dates back to the 60s or 70s, whereas the Swayback knife dates back much earlier. For example, I have a tailor's eyewitness here. Now this is a modern made knife, but it's made by a company that's been making knives since 1832, and this is you know, a really good looking Swayback jack, and it'll have fingerprints on it now because it's got a very polished blade. Again, we've got the Swayback handle, but as is probably more traditional with British Swayback knives, it has a lamb's foot rather than the Wharncliffe blade. Of another example of that here, this is another old English knife. Let's just see what the spring's like on this one. Fairly tenacious is the answer. And these knives are probably known more, funnily enough, as a lamb's foot knife, and this is an early 20th century Sheffield knife. Nice scallop here, and again a lamb's foot. And these knives were generally known, and even now they're generally known as lamb's foot knives, and but they have the Swayback handle. Where we see the Wharncliffe blade come in more commonly is in this pattern here, which is the Ettrick. Now the Ettrick is a really much more exaggerated Swayback with a Wharncliffe blade, and I think what we're looking at in the Swayback jack, and I would relate this more to Tony Bowes, but it also applies here, is the Swayback jack, or the lamb's foot jack, combined with the Ettrick, using in other words, making the Ettrick pattern import to more of an everyday carry pattern, and the lamb's foot gaining the Ettrick blade. And you know, for whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, the Ettrick blade does give this really nice sharp point, which is good for things like removing splinters or whatever, but it's a bit weaker than the lamb's foot, traditional lamb's foot blade. So it's, you know, you can ask yourself which one you prefer. I mean, I'm an old traditionalist, so I tend to go for the lamb's foot, but the Ettrick is a very useful blade, and I actually think that the Ettrick pattern here is actually a very good everyday carry knife, particularly in the UK, where people worry about big blades. These blades are all well under the 3-inch mark, but the Ettrick obviously is considerably smaller, but it still has a full-size handle, and that makes it quite a usable knife. The real purpose of a Swayback handle, though, and the Ettrick and the Wharncliffe blade, is it was a knife for dealing with small game, rabbits and so forth, and the idea being that you need the point to be able to puncture the carcass of the animal, but you want to be able to cut the guts of the animal open without piercing the actual internal organs. So having that pointy blade with a curved back on it means you can get into the animal, slit its belly open without the back of the knife catching into the guts. You've got a sort of smooth curve to roll over them. That's really where it comes from. The lamb's foot is more of a traditional farmer's knife, as opposed to a fairly modern hunting knife. Now, that being said, it's not just Tony Bowes and Ben Belkin that make Swayback knives today, and there is certainly a tradition that has been built on, and one very common example that people have seen in recent years is this from Rough Rider. And I think this is the second iteration of the Rough Rider work knife, was a real step forward for Rough Rider. I think it's still in 440A steel, but the fit and finish and the quality of build and so forth make this an outstanding knife and a brilliant everyday carry knife. And you can have 10 of these for the price of one of those. Would that be preferable? I think to some people it probably would be. I mean, if you're a traditionalist like me, the idea of a pin design and nickel silver bolsters, is, you know, brass liners, all the sort of the really traditional stuff, and incredible fit and finish for a traditional knife. You know, this will give the even the tailors' eyewitnesses of this world a run for their money. Now, the tailors' eyewitnesses have got things like filed spine work and really super polished blades and so forth, and of course some of the most fabulous desert ironwood ever. You know, there's Stephen Cocker had this. I never mentioned that was Stephen Cocker, another Sheffield maker. Doesn't have the stag that's got, but this is micarta. This is micarta. It's a modernish steel. 440A isn't super modern, but you know, there was a time, certainly in my lifetime, when 440 steel of any variety was looked on as being a good steel. But that's particularly when it would be compared with you know, a carbon steel that would corrode and rust in time. 440 steel of any variety, and the fact that it was stainless suddenly made it particularly special. As I say, this is the second iteration of this one. The first iteration was good, but it wasn't. You know, when I saw this one, I thought it was fantastic. When I saw this one come in, I realised that this one was. I saw the flaws in this one, and I think that's what always happens. Now, of course, what Ben has done here is he has taken that original design, which is, you know, a great thing, and he has given it a modern twist. Now, other people have tried to give these things a modern twist, and with varying successes. You know, for example, and I think this will go into history as one of the first of the modern fusion knives that really went mainstream, and that was the Benchmade proper. It was supposed to be a proper knife, but I think Benchmade missed and hit the wall in many ways. I mean, the micarta of it is great. It's really nice micarta. It's S30V steel, which I'm a big fan of. It's one of my very favourite steels because it works well. You know, it'll hold an edge well, but it's relatively easy to sharpen. Of course, as being a Benchmade, it needed to be sharpened. They don't do desperately good edges, so I did this one, and it's actually a Lansky edge. I don't know if you can see it, but it's relatively shiny with just the Lansky system, which is a, you know, relatively budget knife sharpening system, but one that works. Where they perhaps went wrong is they tried to be a bit smart with the blade design. Ben simply said, "What's wrong with the Warncliffe? It works. It's worked for 200 years. Why would you suddenly need to make significant changes to it? What's the advantage?" And I think Benchmade tried to make too many changes, making it a saber grind, made it thicker behind the edge. The overall shape of it is quite nice and it's quite attractive, but I don't think it's any more useful. Where they really fell down, though, was that the action on the proper, you know, it's one of these things that's become, it has a proper action. It's kind of a derisory term that's used. It means it's kind of soft and not very positive. I've been using slip joints my entire life, so I don't really worry about whether the knife's going to close on me. I think that just becomes from that comes out of a laziness of dependence on locking knives. Which is where you're more likely to have serious accidents, incidentally, because if you assume that a knife lock is going to save you and it fails, you're not prepared and ready to be using the knife in the right way to make sure that you don't cut your fingers off. But anyway, they did that, and I think that perhaps didn't quite get there. But there are others that have come into the market, and I picked this one here because it in many ways goes up against the Jack Wolf knives quite well, and it shows you, well, a number of things really. I mean, in many ways they're very similar knives in that they have a modern steel blade. Both cases they are M390, which is a really good steel. It's the same, effectively the same as 20 CV steel, which that's the American Carpenter's version. These two are made in Bowler as a Bowler steel. Bowler are an Austrian firm, but basically the same steel. They have effectively Wharncliffe blades with effectively full flat grounds and a swedge on the top. They're two different designers' take on the same thing. This has the traditional straight edge of a Wharncliffe, whereas this has a slight curve to it. It's also slightly larger, which is a little bit of a problem because it is, the cutting edge is under 3 inches, but we're moving towards a state in the UK where the whole blade length may become more significant. There are arguments to be had on that, and who knows how they will come out, but the Jack Wolf one errs on the side of caution and is indisputably under 3 inches. This is about 3.1 if you include from right the way from here, well under 3 inches if you just took the cutting edge. And so they've both got a very similar sharpening trial as well, purpose of which is just to stop you gaining a wee sort of smile on the edge of the blade here when it's being sharpened, as it's slightly developed here on this one, and is a common feature of, well, if we look back to that older one, you got the same problem. Now, here's the difference. Oh, sorry, I forgot to go on. Both of these then have integrated bolsters and frames. Now, this one happens to have a bolster at this end. This one's a bare head, but you can actually get this one as a bare head as well. So, in effect, what this means is that the bolsters, the frame that runs either side of the spring in the back are one piece on each side, and it's the same here. That makes for a good, solid, strong, well-made knife, and they're both excellent. They both do the same thing, and then they're inlaid with a green micarta, canvas micarta handle, and both again in pretty good quality. Now, what does that want? Yeah, what I really want to say is there is a difference though between these two. Each of them comes with a slip, and I think it's probably fair to say the Jack Wolf slip is a better quality one than the Viper one. The Viper one, to be fair to it, has been carried quite a lot, so it's been in my pockets and my grubby fingers, so they do take up the oil out of your fingers and so forth. But they each come with one of those. The Jack Wolf, as I say, comes in its tin. It's got its cloth and its pog and its fancy box and so forth, whereas the Viper just comes in a small cardboard box, in a plastic bag in a small cardboard box. It does come with a slip, but that's it. But the difference in price, this is about £170, this is about £250. So there is a difference there of about £80, or around about 50% more for this one. And you have to ask yourself why, when you're getting the same steel, titanium, canvas micarta. And I think there are a number of reasons for it, plus and minus. This one is made in Italy. Italy is, of course, a first world country in the European Union, made by people who are members of unions and get well paid and do for their work. This one is made in China, where one doesn't really know what sort of state or the people are working under to make it. So you know, on the one hand, you might expect this to be the more expensive and this to be the cheap one. Well, it isn't. So why? Well, why is this one so much cheaper than that one? I think the first thing to bear in mind is that there are no, as things get more expensive, the amount of money that you add doesn't affect what you get for your money. You know, you want to buy a car and you want to buy a Ford Mondeo, then you get 4 wheels, 5 seats, steering wheel, engine, and so forth. You could buy a Rolls Royce, and the Rolls Royce might cost 10 times as much as the Ford Mondeo, but you only get 4 wheels and you only get 1 steering wheel and 1 engine and 5 seats. Nothing's actually changed, but you get attention to detail, and that attention to detail suddenly escalates the price at a phenomenal rate. And I think that's what we get here. So one of the things that Italian knife companies do is that they manufacture the parts with sort of crowned spines and chamfered edges, and then they bolt them together so that you've got, if it all fits nicely, but it's all one curve into another curve, and it allows you for the fact that these pieces are not hafted. In other words, they're not built, polished together, and made nice and smooth and into one piece. You can simply fit the pieces together, and there is enough tolerance between one piece and another for it to look fine even if they don't quite fit. What's happening here, this is actually really quite like a traditional knife. They make the knife, they make it up, and they make all the pieces oversized, and then they grind them down to size in exactly the same way as Taylor's Eyewitness do, or Stephen Cocker would do, or Otter would do with the Otter knives, or whatever else. These are all hafted knives. So what has to happen in this case? What happens in this case is they manufacture all the pieces, surface treat them, and then somebody bolts them all together, and that's you. And the result of that is that you have small failures of tolerances that are very hard to spot, but once you look, you realize that the pieces don't really fit together perfectly, but they fit together closely enough that you don't really notice, and they're fitted with one chamfer to another chamfer, so you create a small gutter between each of the pieces, and that is sufficient for any small gaps to hide. These are made up, ground, taken to bits, surface treated, and then reassembled. And as a result of that, if you have 2 of these knives and you wanted to swap the the parts on one knife for the other, they don't fit together because each one is individually handmade, whereas these are turned out from a factory. Now, does that matter? It shouldn't, but it does. This knife is very, very good, and I'm not sure on video that you'll even realize what I'm going to talk about here. But when you look at the transitions on this knife from the micarta to the titanium, absolutely perfect. Now, this transition here has to be done with the parts disassembled and then assembled, but you get that line right, then you assemble them, and then you grind them to make sure that everything else is perfect. Then, as I say, you've got to take it a bit, surface treat it, and then reassemble it, and that means you've got to make sure your surface treatments are really, really good as well. Otherwise, you would ruin that fit in doing the surface fitting. Here, what you find is that just occasionally you get this kind of lip between the sorry, I'm not showing you that on camera. You get this kind of lip here between the titanium and the micarta, and it's all round. It's almost imperceptible, but once you start looking for it, you see it. It's slightly shy of the titanium around here. I can run my nail along that edge. Slightly here, it's slightly high of the titanium. At the back, it's pretty close actually. Now, plus the wee failure in this little bit of micarta here, not quite right. Here, the micarta is slightly below the titanium. Now, does it really matter? In terms of a user knife, no, it doesn't. But if you want a knife that is edging towards being perfect and not just very good, then you have to pay for that extra detail, and you do pay for that extra detail, and it's patently obvious once you start to compare these knives very accurately. You can see why one costs more than the other. Are you prepared to pay that extra? I don't know, it's up to you. You may think that's just throwing good money after bad, or you may value that. If you value it, and you value all these bits and pieces that come with it, then this knife doesn't really look like such bad value for money that it, might suddenly appear. But you just have to think to yourself: are you somebody who wants a £25 Rough Rider knife? Do you want a £120 or whatever it is Taylor's Eyewitness knife, £170 Viper knife, or do you want to pay £250? Or equally, do you want to go all out and spend another £200 and buy a Chris Reeve, or the sky's the limit in the knife world, obviously. Depends where you want to go. But this has a place, and it probably has its own value for money. A couple of negatives I wanted to address, I raised last time, and I just want to really just go over them again. The first thing is, on the side of the tin, it says, do not unscrew the knife. Now, that sounds a bit like an order, and I don't know about you, but I don't like being ordered about. I don't like being told. So I raised this with Ben, and he said, well, I can't tell you not to take it to bits. If you want to take it to bits, take it to bits. What he's really doing is giving you advice. And I have to say, I see where he's coming from. I mean, I like traditional pinned knives, and you're never going to take them apart. And these are the bulk of my collection. These are the knives that I like and love and collect and whatever. But you can't take them to bits, or at least if you take them to bits, you really need to know what you're doing, because you've got to drill out these pins, take the knife to bits, try and reassemble it, and then your hafting is never really going to quite match up, so you've got a lot to do. So I know you don't take them to bits. I've never taken this knife to bits. I've had it for quite a while now, and I use it quite a lot, but I've never taken it to bits, even though you theoretically could. I've never taken this to bits, and I've had this for many years. It's a screwed together construction. Spring's quite weak in it as well, so it's probably relatively easy to reassemble. I have taken to bits Manly Wasp, mainly because it's used for dirty work and it gets full of crap, and you really need to take it to bits and clean it out from time to time. But if I owned one of these, the fact that you can take it to bits, I probably wouldn't. And the reason I wouldn't is because putting them back together is really difficult. It's also quite dangerous, because that back spring is a powerful spring, and at some point you've got to fit the blade over the pivot and that back spring over the edge of the blade. Now, the way that Ben does it is, I'm obviously not going to show you how he does it, because I'm not going to take it to bits, but he puts this in a vise and clamps it across here, and then he takes the blade and he pushes it against the spring with his hands until he can get the spring pushed far enough back that the hole in the blade fits over the pivot that's here. I watched him do it on video, and there's a video on his website if you want to see it. It scared the hell out of me, because although he'd wrapped this in tape, you are pushing with as much force as you can muster on a sharp blade to push it over the end of the thing. It would be no hardship to stick that straight through your hand. Personally, I'm not sure that's the way I would assemble a knife, but the the problem is with the way these knives are made, there's a pin or a screw that goes through about here, and there's a screw that goes through in the end, and they form the fulcrum, 3 points there's the fulcrum in the middle. These three points, the pivot, the one at the end and this one here, push against each other. With a traditional knife, the way that it's normally done is that, again, you've got the same pivot points. You probably can't see that one, but there's a pin there, there's a pin there, and a pin there. This one here is just holding on the scale, just as these are. And what you do is that you put the spring in with this pin at the back, you put the blade in with this at the front, then you put the knife into a vise, and you cramp it here. Oops, you cramp it here until those holes line up, and you can push the pin through. Once you've pushed the pin through, you then peen the ends of it to make it stay in place, and then you have the knife. Now, with this knife, well, I should keep this here. There's a screw there instead of a pin, but it's exactly the same. It's there, but they have a spacer, a back spacer that fits in, and that is what's the word? Not countersunk. Countersunk will do at each end, and that fits into the scales. So if you have the knife assembled at both ends, you can't then push that pin into place. You can't squeeze that and put the pin in, because the sleeve has to be pushed in, would have to be pushed in from behind, and because it's countersunk into the covers, or the frame, means you can't do it. So it just doesn't work. So the only way you can do it is the way that Ben does it. Now, how they do it in the factory, I do not know, and he says he doesn't know either. So what he's really saying is, don't take it to bits unless you know what you're doing, and you understand the risks, and you understand the dangers, because otherwise there's a very good chance you're going to hurt yourself. So you can if you want, but I wouldn't. I think this thing is a bad idea, and it's unnecessary. You can get to all the bits of the knife that need, because you don't have any bearings in here. The only thing you have, which is different in this to a traditional knife. Traditional knife, you just have the sides of the frame rub against the blade, and that means that you do get scratch marks on the tang of a knife. Whereas in this, there are in fact washers between the handle and the blade. You can't really, there's nothing to see, but they are there, trust me. Look at Ben's video, you can see them taken apart. But the point is, you can see all the bits that need cleaned and looked after. You've got, when the knife is in the open position like this, you can see the tang on this side, and that first corner, which is the one, that corner there, the bottom of the tang, is what produces the first pull when you're opening the knife, or the first resistance, because that corner's got to push the spring out the back. When you're in the half stop, you can see that, again, this is the second corner, which is the one that produces the lock when the knife is open. Again, you're pushing that spring back, and then if you go to, let's see if I can get it to stop halfway, quite a strong spring, you can see into the back of the knife there, and the spring pushed out. So when it's closed, you can see the bottom of the tang and the back of the tang, and so you can see all the surfaces that you need to keep clean and free of debris and oiled without taking the knife apart. So really, you have to ask yourself why you'd want to take it apart. I say I've taken my Manly Wasp to bits because it comes back after my son's been working on he did some landscape gardening, when it would come back and it would be full of sand and cement dust and stuff like that, and you take it to bits. I wouldn't be using this knife for that sort of job. I think this is too nice. The Manly Wasp is perfect for that. It's got good steel, but it's a quarter of the price of this knife, or maybe less, and you know, it's perfect for that sort of job. It's semi-disposable, whereas I think this is not semi-disposable. This is heirloom quality. Now the only negative on this, I asked people about this knife, and the one thing that people have come up with is that the micarta on these edges is quite harsh transition. I'm not convinced. I see what they're coming from, because when you look at this, it isn't. It's nice and smooth, and even the proper, as you know, as failing as it might be, it doesn't have those sharp edges. So I asked somebody to rank these in order of value, and they thought that the Viper was the more expensive. Yeah, and I see where they were coming from, but I think they were trying to work out the answer to the question without really fully appreciating everything that goes into one of these knives. But anyway, the one thing I would say about this knife is I really like it. I think this is a great little pocket knife, and were I able to get one, because they're sold out, I would have got one, but unfortunately I can't. And unfortunately this one is going to be sent on to be reviewed, and then it'll go back to Paddy. But you never know, this is something I might look out for in the second-hand market at some point in the future, if they don't go up in price too much, which is always a danger with a very limited run like this. There are other models coming out. I'm really looking forward to the Benny's clip, which is a take on another Tony Bowes design, the Lanny's clip. Anyway, this video is far too long, so I'm going to end it there. But if you have watched this far, well done. I will be putting out a short version of this video as well, just to run through the features of this knife without all the background, for those who are not interested in all my waffle. So anyway, if you have watched this far, thank you very much. Please give it a thumbs up if you like it, and remember to subscribe if you want to see the rest of this series over the rest of this year. Thank you very much. Goodbye.